Introversion and extroversion are terms first coined by psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung in Switzerland in the 1920s. According to Jung, an extrovert seeks intensive contact with the outside world. An introvert instead turns the psychic energy inwards. Jung believed that no one is 100% extrovert or 100% introvert. Instead, we carry both traits. However, most minds tend to lean either to one side or the other. If both characteristics are equally present, we can speak of someone who has an ambivert personality. In the 1960s, the psychologist Hans Eysenck added to Carl Jung's ideas. He argued that the main difference between introverts and extroverts lies in the way they gain and recharge their mental energy. By nature, introverted people have a higher level of brain activity and therefore feel a greater need to shield themselves from external stimuli. By withdrawing themselves, they gain mental energy. The neuronal activity of extroverts is lower. They overcome this lack by exposing themselves to external stimulation. This charges their inner batteries. To illustrate the difference, let's compare two imaginary children. Jay is extroverted. He loves to be surrounded by classmates. He enjoys being the center of attention and loves to talk to his buddies about all kinds of stuff. He organizes football games with strangers and right after is open to playing ping pong with someone else. By seeking social stimuli, he gains mental energy. Anne is introverted. As others play around in the park, she often enjoys sitting alone watching. At home, she plants herbs in the garden all by herself. She slowly becomes a real expert in this field, but that's her secret. To recharge her batteries, Anne needs peace and quiet time. Introverts are not necessarily shy, even if it appears they like to walk away from small talk. Anne, in fact, is not shy at all. She is not afraid to talk to anyone, not even seniors. When too many people are around and the conversations become superficial or confusing, she gets super tired. Her strategy is to fade out and go inside herself to recharge through silence. Jay loves to have many people around him. To jump from one conversation to the next stimulates him. Some experts claim that extroverts and introverts use different brain areas to form their thoughts. An extrovert tends to use short-term memory and therefore is able to come to fast associations. Jay therefore talks fast and a lot. He appears smart because his brain always offers an answer quickly. However, he often speaks before he thinks and later changes his mind. Someone like Anne works with her brain to carefully retrieve information from her long-term memory. Her thoughts are more complex and hence need more time to develop. She therefore thinks first and then speaks. If the two were asked for directions by a tourist, Anne would spend time thinking about the best answer, while Jay would have already come up with different kinds of options. Good teachers and clever business leaders know about the different nature of introverts and extroverts and try to develop their strengths. When raising questions, they ask everyone to think for a minute in silence before answering. Extroverts then learn to formalize their thoughts before they speak, and introverts get more talking time to practice public speaking. At brainstorming, they use a formal process or a talking stick to make sure Anne also gets to participate. Group projects can be formalized to support both temperaments. In one project, extroverts and introverts work together. Jay then learns from Anne how to think ideas over to develop more complex thoughts. Anne, in return, benefits from Jay's fast association skills and learns to think and speak more flexibly. In the next project, the same temperaments work together. Then they see their own traits in the opposite person. If confronted with problems in teams of the same character, introverts need to speak up and extroverts are forced to think deep to proceed. The educator Rudolf Steiner was a proponent of this method for his Waldorf schools. Psychologist Jerome Kagan's research on temperament in toddlers showed that many character traits we are born with make it into adulthood. He confronted 500 babies with different stimuli, like loud sounds and bad smells. Around 20% of the babies cried or got nervous, 40% stayed relaxed, and the other 40% were somewhere in between. A second test years later showed that babies who didn't react strongly turned out to be more extroverted.
With this analysis in mind, there are multiple studies that have been conducted in relation to how personality is correlated to introversion, extroversion, or ambiversion. Most developmental researchers state that all three of these are more tied to genetics than we might think, and while certain traits may be learned, children will often lean towards the same portion of the spectrum as their parents. According to Dr. Marty Olson-Laney, quote, genes give you a range of introversion, and based on your childhood experience, you might set a level of introversion later in life. In other words, people are genetically inclined towards a range of introversion or extroversion. Thus, to some extent, everyone is an ambivert, but nurture can override nature in some instances if certain traits are enforced enough. Additionally, there are times in everyone's lives when people as a collective tend to experience changes in their personality types, which is around the same time that we otherwise experience larger changes in our lives. This includes our teenage years or after birth, when we are learning a lot about ourselves and others, which can lead to changes in the way we see the world. Typically, this will not change our outlook entirely, also suggesting that an introvert will most likely not become an extrovert overnight, and vice versa, but it is a likely time for change to occur. One of the most recent examples of an enforced period of change that everyone experienced was during the pandemic of COVID-19.
One of the most recent examples of an enforced period of change was the COVID-19 pandemic. With a drastic change in environment for everyone around the world, extroverts, introverts, and ambiverts all have differing views on their experience during the COVID-19 lockdown, ranging from positive to negative correlations during their time. An article from NBC News provides insight into one couple's life during the lockdown, one partner being very extroverted and the other being very introverted. Alex stated that she was desperate for this pressure release valve found in the company of friends, but that valve, one through which I needed to externalize my despair, had been shut off. Meanwhile, her life was coasting along. She was happy on the couch with me, our cats, and Netflix, her perfect-sized crowd. To Alex, it felt that the tables had turned. Alex gained energy while socializing, so even though she could talk via video calls, it still wasn't the same. She struggled to navigate mandated alone time without the company of people and friends, feeling stuck and unwell. On the other hand, her wife felt less anxious, stating that I would need to kind of plan to recharge after spending a lot of time with people. I don't need to do that, which is pleasant. Alex's comment greatly reflects a shift in our society from pre-COVID to post-COVID. Extroverts are rewarded for their outspoken tendencies and how they function due to similarities to American values. Though introverts dealt with the COVID-19 lockdown better than extroverts, a BBC interview quote states, social connections are a basic human need. Being an introvert doesn't mean you don't want to socialize. Andrew Shate, the co-founder of Me Quiltrum, states, by the end of 2020, we saw a large spike in loneliness, and introverts and extroverts were equally affected. He continues, burnout occurs when the demand placed on us greatly outstrips our psychological, emotional, and physical resources. Everyone needs social contact to preserve mental well-being. So even though introverts by nature may have thrived during the pandemic, people still need social contact. The development of introverts, extroverts, and ambiverts is quite interesting, as it's just not one finite factor in where people fall into the scale. Genetics and personal experiences start to shape one's personality, and major events such as the COVID-19 pandemic can affect both introverted, extroverted, and ambiverted people. Despite their differences, social connections are necessary for both parties.